You're listening to Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Leia. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show.
Place with my neighbor who was pretty kooky. It was probably about 1986 or about 1986, I guess. That's about when it happened. Just came over to me out of the blue and just handed me this book and wanted to know if I believed in Bigfoot. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
And I
wish I could figure out who that guy was.
Yeah, exactly. You were saying that it was an old Oregon logger that had written that pamphlet about how he had Bigfoot on his property, or do you remember anything about the story that was contained inside the booklet?
One of the things that he said in the booklet, I think it happened. It had to do with his first encounter with Bigfoot, and said he lived up in the woods somewhere in Oregon and in a travel trailer, and there were a lot of logging roads up there. I know my wife and I were thinking about buying a house up there in Florence, Oregon, and I know the real estate guy took us around, and man, we were on dirt roads, and there's just roads everywhere out there, that they cut for all these logging operations that they had going. But anyway, one of the things that he talked about early on in this booklet, and it got me to thinking about the size of Sasquatch, is that he said he was out for some kind of a little evening stroll down one of his logging roads near where he was staying in his little travel trailer. And he said he stopped to kind of look over the countryside, and his eyes were drawn to this creature that was standing behind a stump of a large tree that had been cut down. And he said this creature was standing behind the stump, and he could see the creature from the top of his head down to about the middle of his chest, and the rest of it was concealed by the stump. And so he was looking downhill through this clear-cut forest, and so he was watching this thing, and then he said he turned his eyes away and he looked back, and the thing was gone. So at some point in the shortly after that, occurred maybe the next day or something like that, he went down to that stump where he had seen that creature. And he said he was himself like 6'2" or 6'3", and he stood behind the stump, and the top of the stump was maybe a couple of feet above the top of his head. So it made that Sasquatch about 11 or 12 feet high. And so that's how he kind of opened up in the early parts of this book. And then he somehow, and I can't remember how, it's been almost 40 years. He made friends with this family of Sasquatch, and they took him to what he referred to as the fifth dimension. And he said he could actually look back on people in our dimension, which is a third dimension. And he had just all kinds of things to say that, about that kind of stuff. And it was just, it was pretty far out stuff. But the guy stood by what he said, because I called him up on the phone and asked him who he was, and he told me who he was. And I talked to him for about an hour, and the guy was definitely convincing, and very sincere, and didn't sound at all delusional, but just makes you wonder, about maybe what the extraterrestrial powers of these things might be. Do all of them have these powers, or is just some of them have these powers? It's, who knows? It's just, something we can talk about and speculate about, but I don't know anybody that has ever talked to me personally about what this old logger talked to me about.
It's very interesting. So listeners, if you know what this pamphlet is, it's about 65 pages, and we're not sure who the guy's name is, but if you're listening and you know what this pamphlet is, let me know. You can email me or put it in the YouTube comments, and then I'll let Mr. Black know, because I'm sure, I would like to know. I'm sure he would like to know as well. But that's a very interesting side story about something that happened during the 80s. But to let the listeners know, so you contacted me, sir, quite a while ago, and we've been going back and forth via email about that you've had an encounter that took place in 1958 in Northern California. And we finally gotten to the point where we're able to chat about it on the phone and to be able to share, so you can share what happened. But I first want to say thank you for coming on the line tonight to share what happened to you back in the 50s. But I just the floor is yours, sir.
I grew up in Northern California in a place called Lake County. It's about 120 miles north of San Francisco, in the mountains of it's in the coastal mountain range of California. Lake County is surrounded by Napa County on the south, which everybody knows is heavily wine country. Sonoma County, also wine country. Mendocino County, pretty much the same thing. Colusa County and Glenn County. And now Lake County, when I grew up in the 50s, was predominantly walnut orchards, pear orchards, cattle and sheep ranches. And there was a large resort community that surrounded the Clear Lake, which is the largest freshwater lake in California. Lake County was very sparsely populated in the 50s. The population of the county was probably about 17,000. And I went to high school in Kelseyville and graduated from Kelseyville High. And my senior class only had 42 students in it. So it just gives you an idea how small a community and how sparsely populated the county was. My dad was, during World War II, worked for a mining company in Clear Lake. It was a quicksilver mining operation, and they supplied quicksilver, which from that you get mercury. And so after World War II, he bought a bulldozer and a pickup, and he was clearing land for some wealthy ranchers from Southern California. and they were going to plant walnut orchards in this very brushy, rugged part of Lake County. And when my father was done clearing off this one piece of land, which was about 400 acres, they asked him if he wouldn't be the general manager and be in charge of planting it as a walnut orchard. So I grew up on a ranch that was had 400 acres in walnuts, and then it had about 800 acres in open pasture land where we ran cattle. So fast forward to 1958, and my brother and I listened to my dad talk about how he wanted to irrigate his orchard 24 hours a day. So he hired all these people from surrounding counties and cities and towns, and none of them worked out. They were all a bunch of alcoholics, and they drank on the job, and they did terrible work, and so he had to fire them all. So my brother and I went to my dad and said, hey, listen, if you want to continue your irrigation project here where you want to irrigate the orchard 24 hours a day, we can do that job. And my dad thought we were a little too small to do that. I was 14. My brother was about 12. And we had a friend by the name of Jack, who is deceased, and my brother is now deceased. And so we convinced my dad that we could do the job. And so we set up a schedule where we were moving this irrigation pipe through the orchard 24 hours a day, and every 8 hours we would move the irrigation pipe 40 feet. So this one night, it happened to be a Sunday night, and it was about 7 o'clock at night, and we had just gotten done moving all this irrigation pipe, and we were driving around the orchard where we had moved this. When I talk about this irrigation pipe, it was about 2 miles of irrigation pipe. So it was a considerable job that took several hours to accomplish. So anyway, we were driving around the orchards. We had all these ranch roads that kind of dissected the orchard into 40-acre parcels. So we're driving around, the three of us in this old Chevy pickup, branch pickup. And as I came to the end of one field and made a right turn and was driving along, my brother and Jack said to me, hey, stop the pickup because we see somebody walking in the orchard. And there shouldn't have been anybody in the orchard. Nobody worked on Sunday night except my brother and Jack and I. My mom and dad were at home across the property about 3/4 of a mile home in the ranch house. And so I slowed the pickup down and kind of pulled off the side of the road, and I could look back in the orchard. We could all look back in the orchard about 75 or 100 feet, and we could see somebody walking back in the orchard. We could only see him from about the waist down because of the low-hanging limbs and branches of the walnut trees. So as soon as I pulled the truck over and stopped so we could get a better look at what it was back there in the orchard that was walking along, whoever it was, and we couldn't identify it at the time, started running through the orchard. So I took off, and we were kind of paralleling this thing for a while. And Jack and my brother were telling me where this thing was running. And so it was about a 1/4 mile down to our barns and our shop. And at that point, I made a right turn, and the orchard from that point, the road was very steep. It was about 12, 14, 15 degree incline. And they could see this creature, whatever it was, and they said it was pretty good size. It looked like a pretty good sized man. They didn't know what it was. running through the orchard. What we thought it was an escaped convict, like a trustee that lived in the Department of Forestry firefighting camp, which was about 1.5 miles as the crow would fly from our ranch. There were no fences. They had people working there that were forestry personnel that kind of kept track of these people. But since there were no fences, these people could wander off. We thought it was one of those people.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
That had escaped and was running through the orchard. And so anyway, we went up. So I drove the truck up this ranch road, and it's pretty steep. And there was an owner's property, an owner's house halfway up this hill. And we went about 100 or 200 yards past that. And we stopped at a point where we thought we were going to intersect with this person that we thought it must be a person that was running through the orchard. So we stopped the truck. We all got out. All three of us got out, and we're just waiting on the side of the road. We're kind of standing by the right front fender of the pickup, and we could hear this thing coming through the orchard, but we couldn't see it because of the trees. And it sounded like a horse running through the orchard. It was bipedal, but the sound of this thing breathing, it sounded just like my horse. My brother and I both had horses, and just sounded like them when they were breathing heavily. And so we just waited there until finally we saw what this thing was as it came out of the orchard. And as it came up higher in the orchard, the soil was not as good a soil, and so the trees were not nearly as big of trees as down lower on the hill. And so when this came out of the trees, we could see that it was about 7 to 7.5 feet tall, probably weighed in the neighborhood of 550 pounds or more. And this thing was clomping along at probably about a 4-foot stride, and it had been running through an area that had just been irrigated, so it was very, very deep and muddy. And then above that, it had been cultivated about 12 or 14 inches deep, and this thing was running through that stuff at a pretty good pace, and at about what I consider about a 3 to 4 foot stride, which is more than any man I think could do in that heavy mud and in that steep grade. And as this thing kept getting closer to us, we got a real good look at this thing. And this particular creature is not the kind. I've listened to other podcasts where people describe these Sasquatch creatures as having a shoulder width of up to 4 to 5 feet, but this creature wasn't like that. This creature was tall, 7.5 feet tall, very heavy, but very muscular, but not wide in the shoulders like that. And as this thing got closer to us, when it kind of turned to look directly at us, it had to kind of turn its body. Its head looked like this. It looked like the shoulders kind of went from the edge of the tip of the shoulders up to where the ears might be on the skull. It just looked like, what I would, at the time, it looked like, some of the football players that I would see on TV, I guess. But this thing kind of grinned at us as it came closer, didn't show us any teeth, just grinned at us. And it never slowed down. It never made any threatening gesture toward us. It had its facial features looked like that of an Indian. So it had a humanoid kind of facial features. It was covered in hair. It had a round head, didn't have a conical head. There was not it had a heavy brow ridge. The forehead, uh, the hairline came down within maybe an inch or two of the brow line. There was no hair on his face, on its neck, and under its ears, and I couldn't even see its ears. And as this thing came up the hill past us, my brother and Jack wanted to get back in the truck, and they wanted to get the hell out of there because this thing scared them. I have no idea why I wanted to stick around and watch this thing go by. But once it went by us and continued up the hill, we got back in the truck and we waited a little bit, just maybe a minute or so, watched this thing as it kept going up the hill. And it didn't have to go much further up the hill until it intersected another four-way intersection of our ranch roads. And so I started the pickup up, and I started up the hill in this old 41 Chevy, and it made a lot of racket. It had a straight pipe, no muffler. And this thing, we're grinding up we're not talking about a muscle car here. This is old 41 Chevy with a little 6-cylinder, and we're grinding up the hill, and this thing made a lot of transmission noise. And so when this creature got to the intersection at the top of the hill where these four ranch roads came together, why, it turned and tried to look back at where we were coming up the hill. And in order to do that, it had to torque its body completely around because it didn't seem to be able to turn its neck. And so it went across the intersection. It went into, kind of entered another 40 acre section of walnut trees, and it kind of crossed that section at a diagonal. And that part of the orchard was pretty flat for a couple 100 yards, and then it dropped off in what I would think is about 14 or 15 degree downhill slope. So I had to drive all the way around on these ranch roads to try to keep in sight of this thing. And so the more that we tried to keep up with it, the more this thing started to run. And as it was running down this hill through the orchard, I would estimate that it was running at about 25 or 30 miles an hour. And its stride at that point was maybe 10, 15 feet or something like that. And when we finally got down to the hill, this thing crossed the road that we were on, never looked at us, never gave us a glance at that point, ran across the road in front of us, and it ran across that road into the property of a neighbor who also had a walnut orchard. Nobody lived there at the time, but they had some barns and some equipment sheds. And this creature ran in between their barns and their equipment shed, and then ran another 100 yards or so. And at where the walnut orchard met the brush line and the tree line, this thing just charged into the brush. And the brush was maybe 15, 18 feet high. It just went through that brush like a bulldozer, never even slowed down. And at that point, we lost track of this creature. So my brother and Jack and I had a conversation about whether or not we were going to tell my dad about this encounter. And we had lobbied my dad pretty hard for about a month to let us take on this job of moving the irrigation pipe. We made good money. He paid us what he paid those guys that never showed up or drank on the job and did a bad job. He paid us just as well as he paid those guys. And so we didn't want to lose that job. It was a great job. It was better than doing other jobs on the ranch that we didn't like to do. So we decided that we wouldn't tell my dad. And I failed to mention that the time of the year that this was in late July of 1958, and the deer season in Lake County opens up this first Saturday of August every year. And so when I started carrying a Winchester rifle in our ranch truck, I just told my dad, I said, if I see a deer out here, while we're changing pipe and I can get a good shot at a deer, I'll shoot it. And I was going to shoot a deer, but that's not the reason I was carrying that rifle, because I was afraid that thing was going to come back. I really didn't know what it was that I saw. I had never heard anybody in my circle of family or friends. I'd never heard anybody ever talk about a creature that was over 7 feet tall, covered in hair, bipedal, never heard anything that would even lead me to believe. I never heard the word Sasquatch or Bigfoot. That never had entered my vocabulary. Never heard anybody talk about that. And so as we continued on through the summer, moving irrigation pipe and working in the orchard at night, we had these headlights, they were like a head lantern, powered by a 6-volt battery, small 6-volt battery, kind of like a miner would wear in a mining tunnel or something. And I can tell you that all summer long, when I was out there in the dark, I always felt like I was being watched. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I would sometimes the feeling of being watched just was so overpowering that I would look around with my headlamp to see if I could see if there was anything out there watching me. And I never saw anything that was out there in the dark with us. But it most certainly spooked us. But we decided that we weren't going to tell my dad, because we thought that he would think that it might be too dangerous for us little guys to be out there in the dark. And so, we didn't want to lose our job. So anyway, fast forward about a year, and my dad subscribed to a publication called True Magazine. And one of the publications in, I think it was 1959, was about the episode encounter, I guess you will, of a guy by the name of Jerry Crew. And Jerry Crew was a bulldozer operator over in Humboldt County. I think it's Humboldt County, might be Del Norte County. But anyway, it's up in what is now Bigfoot country, in the Trinity, what's called the Trinity Alps. It's a very rugged part of Northern California. It borders the Oregon-California border. And Jerry Crew, as a bulldozer operator, he worked for a company that had a contract with some logging companies to build some logging roads back in the area surrounding Willow Creek. And Willow Creek is, if you visit there, is certainly steeped in a lot of Bigfoot mythology. And there's a big redwood tree that's been carved by somebody with a chainsaw into a great big Sasquatch. And there's a museum there. And if you go into the restaurant, the menu is full of all kinds of Bigfoot menu choices, And so anyway, Crew and his lived over in the Sacramento Valley area somewhere. So on Friday night, he would go home. And so he would, when he came back to work on Monday to fire up his cat bulldozer and build roads, he started seeing these big barefoot tracks in the powdery dirt roads that they were, the logging roads that they were building. And so they made plaster cast of these footprints. And at some point they contacted some people in Eureka, California. It's close by, maybe 50, 60 miles away, I guess. And at the newspaper, the local newspaper, and I think one of the editors or the editor of that newspaper was retired from the Los Angeles Times.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
And kind of thought that the story that Jerry Crew told him about these big footprints that he saw all over the construction site, and the plaster cast that he brought to him, I think, and kind of dismissed it as a kind of an odd story, maybe not too believable. But then after about a week or so, or some time went by, the editor picked up the story and then published it. And eventually that story made its way through a lot of different newspapers throughout California and throughout the Western United States, I guess. And eventually it ended up in True magazine. So my dad had been reading this article about all the stuff that Jerry Crew had been reporting. And so I saw that, what my dad was reading. So they had a kind of a sketch of what this thing looked like. And when I saw the sketch, then I knew what I saw. I remembered back a year before or so, and what I saw in True magazine is what I saw on the ranch that night, that Sunday night in the latter part of July of '58. And so we still never told my dad. So it was maybe a year or so later, maybe in the next year, why my dad had gotten contacted by his younger brother, and my uncle was the general manager of a 4,000-acre sheep ranch in Sonoma County. It was out within, I think it was within about 18 or 20 miles of the Pacific coast, and this little town of Gualala and some other places out there. Very small place. Anyway, my uncle had invited my dad and some other friends of his out on the sheep ranch to go wild hog hunting. So my dad was over there for 3 or 4 days, and he shot this big hog. It was about maybe 450 pounds. And so he brought home these big slabs of pork, and they each weighed, 75, 80 pounds, maybe 100 pounds. I don't know. So he brought these big slabs of pork home. Not sure what we were going to do with 150, 200 pounds of pork, but anyway, brought it home. And at night, the first night that he was home, we had these on the back of our farmhouse, we had these big meat hooks that my dad had kind of screwed into the ends of the roof rafters. And so when we would kill deer on the ranch, after we had dressed out the deer, we would hang the deer out at night on the back of the house. Well, that's what he did with these big slabs of this wild hog that he'd killed. He hung these big slabs up there on these meat hooks. Well, these hooks were about 11 feet off the ground, and my dad was only about 5'8", 5'8.5". So in order to hang those slabs of pork meat up there. He had to get on a stepladder. So the first night he hung the things up there, and in the morning he took them down. They wrapped them up in some old bedcloths and put them in a sleeping bag and put them underneath their bed where it was nice and cool. The following night, they take them out from underneath the bed, take them out of the sleeping bag, hang them out at night. So they planned to do that for about 3 nights. So on the third night, my dad hangs the meat out there. And the following morning, day 4, he goes out there to take his wild hog meat off the back of the house, and it's missing. So my dad comes in, and I think my brother and I are sitting there eating breakfast or something, and he asks us, "Did you do something with the meat on the back of the house?" Answer is no. We couldn't even. We were just little guys. We couldn't lift that stuff, you know. We get a. So anyway, my dad told me, he says, "Go get." He says, "I bet the dogs got it." I said, "Dad, we don't have a single." We had about 4 or 5 dogs. I said, "We don't have any dogs that can jump 11 feet. Not even if they got up on the porch and jumped up there, they wouldn't be able to." I said, "And by the way, you know, and if a dog were to grab it, or a coyote," we had coyotes, no wolves in Lake County, just coyotes. I said, "If a coyote got it, they would just rip it off of there and probably try to eat it right there and just make a great big mess." So anyway, Dad asked me to go get all the dogs. So I go and get all. We had about 4 or 5 dogs. So I go get all the dogs, and I bring them around there. And that area by the back steps of our house, near where that meat was hanging, those dogs would not come even close to that. You could grab them by their collar, and in order to get them over there, that area, you'd have to drag them. And these dogs were clearly not willing to even come anywhere close to the back of that house. And those dogs made no sound at night. They didn't. Usually anybody that would come around, they would bark like crazy. But, you know, in the summertime, we didn't have any air conditioning way back in the late 50s. So we slept with all the windows open. So if the dogs were going to bark, you're going to hear them. And so I was pretty sure what it was in my mind that came and took that meat off the back of the house. But my brother and I never said a word about any of our experiences or any of our encounters with Bigfoot. About 2 years ago, I located my old friend Jack, and he had liver and colon cancer, and he was very, very sick. And I was very sad to hear that, because I finally located him after all those years, and tracked him down through friends. And I wanted to talk to him about what he remembered on the day we saw that Sasquatch in the orchard. And I asked him if he would tell me what his recollection of that time was. And he told me, he said, "Norm," he said, "I'm just too sick and too weak to even try to talk about it." And so he died about 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, and I never got to talk to him about his experiences on that day when my brother and he and I, you know, saw that creature coming out of the orchard. So anyway, there was an episode on another podcast, and there was a guy by the name of Mike Woolley had an episode or an encounter. I think it was up in the state of Washington. And so they posted a picture of what his Sasquatch looked like, his encounter looked like, and it was exactly what I saw. It was the face of this creature had the face of an Indian. It didn't look like the Indians from my neck of the woods there in Lake County or in that part of California. It looked more like the Indians that you would see in the plains, in the plain states, Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, those kinds of people. And so that, and so later when I read about this lady by the name of Melba Ketchum, who is has a DNA lab in Texas. I think she is herself a veterinarian, and she claims that from some hair samples and some other tissue samples that she may have collected from a dozen or more sources around the United States, she claims that the mitochondrial part of the DNA, the female side of the DNA, showed a human female, but on the male side of the DNA, it was undetermined. So it got me to thinking about how closely the Sasquatch creatures, some of them, might be to humans, to be able to possibly crossbreed with a male Sasquatch and a female human. So there's no proof of that, I think, other than what Melba Ketchum says that she determined through her DNA testing. And of course, she is a very controversial person because she was not successful in getting her study published in any peer-to-peer group publication, and so she was criticized very heavily, and so a lot of some people believe that her DNA testing is accurate, while other people discount it altogether. I know that there are people like Kathy Strain and her husband Bob. Her husband Bob, I think, is a retired firefighter. Kathy Strain is an anthropologist, works for the U.S. Department of Forestry near Sonora in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, and she's had encounters with these creatures, as I understand, and written a lot of books where she interviewed a lot of Indian tribes across the nation. So it just depends, I guess, on what Indian tribe that you might talk to. Some of them refer to them as cannibals, these Sasquatch creatures. Others talk about these creatures as people. And so there's a wide range of, and I know that the Indians up in British Columbia have a lot of contact with these things as well. So it's an interesting situation where we see these things, people report them, yet we can find no evidence that physical evidence that they exist, other than maybe the hair samples in the scat and some maybe skin tissue or something that Melba Ketchum came into possession of. But I know what I saw. I know what my brother and I saw, and nobody can convince me that creature is not flesh and blood and real.
Absolutely, Mr. Black. That's an incredible story.
That's my story.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. There's a lot to unpack from that. I do have a few questions for you in a few minutes, but it's just, there's a few observations I had from your story. So it's like, happens back in, you said 58, before the Jerry Crew incidents, which happened up in Bluff Creek, which is about 5.5 to 6 hours north of where Lake County is, I believe. And then you were talking about Sonoma County to the west. That's about maybe 2.5 hours where you had the issue with the wild hogs. So that's just so people can picture that in their minds where all this happened. But about the creature that you saw back there in Lake County, do you remember anything specific about the arms of the creature at all?
This thing, when it was walking, the arms were swinging and the hands were down by its knees.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
And its knees were not in the same spot as our knees. Their knees are lower on their legs. And when they walk, they don't walk like we do. And they have this kind of when people walk, or even if they run, they're bobbing up and down. But not these creatures. They don't do that. And if you look at what Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin saw down in Bluff Creek, Patty, how she walked, that's how this creature walked. Just kind of glided along. And unlike Patty, who looked like she had a pretty bad injury to her right leg, this creature that we saw looked perfectly healthy to me and was going through the orchard at a pace that no man could even begin to keep up with.
Was the creature wearing any clothes or no clothes? Was there hair on the body? Any details regarding that?
I did notice a San Francisco 49er baseball cap.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
All right. You never know, right? Just
kidding. I was a 49er fan when I grew up as a kid, but no clothes, no nothing, just hair. And, I could not see its ears. I don't know if these things got big ears, little ears, no ears. I don't know what they have. I noticed one of the things I noticed when it grinned, but it didn't show teeth, is how wide the mouth was. I mean, it's the opening for the mouth is way larger than a human being. And when I saw this picture that was sketched out by, I don't know who sketched it out, but it was on this Mike Woolley encounter on another podcast. That's what clinched it for me. When I saw that picture, I can't remember where I saw that picture. I guess maybe I saw that on the podcast itself. I think that's where I saw that. But the sketch that I saw in True Magazine was very similar to what I saw, but more hair on the face. But it was similar enough that I knew that that's what I had seen, that what I saw was a Bigfoot also.
After the incident in Lake County, did you ever go back and try to look at any of the tracks that were left close up, anything like that?
Well, yeah, we tried to see, what these tracks look like, but we're talking plowed ground, and we're talking about freshly irrigated soil in the orchard, and you couldn't. It's just there was just no way to really get an accurate idea about a footprint. The footprint, was about maybe 16 or 17 inches long, but the shape of it was because the ground was plowed and other parts of the orchard where it came through that we looked, had been irrigated and it was muddy. You just couldn't tell. You couldn't tell. The Sasquatch was sinking into the mud and into the plowed ground at least a foot, and underneath that was just hard dirt, and so there was really no. You couldn't get a good picture as to the shape of the footprint. You just couldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that heavy would definitely be sinking down, especially in an area where there's irrigation happening. It's such a very interesting encounter. Did you ever hear of any sightings from neighbors around that area, or hear of any other people in that area talking about seeing things as well?
No.
Okay.
Not a soul.
Yeah. Wow.
Not a soul. Later in life, I joined the California Highway Patrol, and some of the guys I worked with in Los Angeles transferred up to the Mount Shasta area, and so after I had retired from the Highway Patrol, I started tracking down. I started thinking about this encounter that I had. I'd started listening to some podcasts about Sasquatch, so I tracked down some of my old workmates from my Highway Patrol days down in Los Angeles, and these guys were retired, but they had retired from up there by Mount Shasta. And they told me all kinds of stories about some of the encounters that some of those guys had. And they never, not one of them ever saw the creature. All that they saw footprints in the roads. One guy told me that they had a big fire up there, a big brush fire up in the area where he was working, up in Modoc. I think it was either Lassen or Modoc County. And so they were, the fire was being driven by about 30-mile-an-hour winds. So, I mean, every living creature, mountain lion, Sasquatch, deer, you name it, raccoon, whatever, they were all running for their life to try to outrun the fire. And they were using airplanes to try to control the fire. And so they're dropping this fire retardant, which is roughly about 8,000 gallons of water with all this red and purple fire retardant. So a lot of the areas along where these state highways, 2-lane state highways, kind of dissected this area where this big fire was. Why these highway patrol guys that I know, they saw footprints, muddy footprints that went across the state highway, and the highway was probably 60 feet wide or something like that, paved area with the shoulders and everything, about 60 feet wide. And they said that these footprints from what they thought was a Sasquatch, they cleared that roadway in about 3 steps. So a very large animal leaving a very large footprint and cleared a very wide road in just a few steps.
Yeah.
So they're out there.
I'm not surprised.
They're out there. And I talked to some highway patrolmen that worked up in this area called Truckee. It's right on the Nevada-California line. And they have a big truck inspection facility there, the highway patrol. And these guys said that they see these things all the time crossing the road. And but you never hear anybody talking about it because Nobody talks about Bigfoot. If you want to get promoted on the job, or if you don't want to be criticized and made fun of, you don't talk about Bigfoot. I don't care if you've seen them, taken pictures of them, have proof of them. Nobody that I ever knew, except the very few people that I do know that worked up in those areas that I thought might have had an encounter, and some of them did come into contact with some evidence that those things exist, like footprints, wet footprints across a road. Nobody's talking about that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And I've actually taken a gentleman called in one day with I believe it was a sighting from the Truckee area. The ones you were talking about, are those recent or?
No, these were probably 20, 25 years ago.
Sure. Yeah. But Mount Shasta.
Those guys went on the highway patrol back in the 60s with me, and we're all retired.
Gotcha.
You know? So they're just recounting old memories of their days when they worked up there.
Absolutely. And the Mount Shasta, I mean, if you go to bigfootencounters.com and you go into the California encounters area, listeners can definitely do that. There's some wild encounters from Mount Shasta. That whole region, if you look into it, you could just go rabbit trails upon rabbit trails of hidden treasure and Bigfoot and people disappearing up on the mountain. There's a lot of stories.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories about the Sasquatch that live in the mountain.
Really?
You know, I don't know how they transport themselves back and forth from inside to outside. I don't know. But there are, the Indians that live up in that area tell stories, I guess, of, these creatures that live in the mountain.
That is true.
Crazy.
There's a whole, there is supposedly a whole civilization that lives inside Mount Shasta. I've always wanted to talk to someone who's had encounters there. If you're listening and you have experienced stuff around Mount Shasta, reach out to me, please. Mr. Black, this has been incredible. There's a question I like to ask now, and I ask this to everyone. It's a left field one, but and it doesn't have to do with Bigfoot, but sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. In your experience in California, all the other places you've been, have you ever heard of anyone seeing any creatures that would look like a hyena?
Look like a what?
Like a hyena.
A hyena?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, cool. All right.
I mean like a dog man or something like that?
Yeah, some people would call it a dog man, but some people actually are seeing what they're saying looks like an actual African hyena.
No, I know I've listened to some podcasts where some game wardens and some forestry people shot one of those things with a .45 3 times, and it had no effect on that thing. It just kind of snarled at him and then just kind of ran off. I read about them. I've heard them talk about on a podcast. I don't know anybody that's ever seen anything like that. And I've never seen anything like that myself.
It's weird stuff. Some people have seen them, some haven't, but you never know what's out there in the woods. You've had it just an
sounds
incredible...
like Skinwalker Ranch stuff.
Oh man, if you've looked into Skinwalker Ranch, then you know about the supposed dire wolves and the Bigfoot going through the portals out there. And I mean, there's some wild history in that area for sure.
Yeah, now they're drilling down. They drill down in part of the ranch, and they hit something, and about 90 feet or something, they hit something metallic.
It's weird stuff for sure. In the Lake County, California area, were there any other events of high strangeness that would happen besides Bigfoot that you noticed, or was Bigfoot the main thing that was happening out there in Lake County?
that was, I never knew anybody that had an encounter. If there was other people that had an encounter, nobody was talking to me about it. And the only three people that I know that ever saw anything like that was my brother, who was killed in a oil well explosion in Wyoming in 1978. And then my friend Jack that died about a couple of years ago. And he was just too sick and too ill to even talk about it. I was really hoping that I could have a conversation with him, but I didn't know that he was as sick as he was. And so, I kind of lost an opportunity there to kind of go down memory lane about, because people see things differently.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors. Exactly.
And maybe I was hoping that he would have noticed some features of that creature that I didn't see, and I was mostly focused on the face and this thing grinning at us. It was creepy. That really creeped us out when that thing just looked at us, and it came within about 50 or 75 feet from us. And we were on a ranch road, but separating us from the orchard was a drainage ditch that was about maybe 20 feet wide and about 15 or 16 feet deep. We felt pretty comfortable that this thing wasn't going to jump over there and get us. And again, it never made any movement, aggressive movement at all. It just looked over at these three little kids, these, pre-teenage kids, and just grinned and just kept on going. It never slowed down. And matter of fact, as it went up to the top of the hill and went over the other side, it picked up speed, a lot of speed. I never saw anything run like that. I mean, this thing was keeping up with the pickup, and it was something. All these years I can just picture it in my mind. It really had a lasting effect on me, and I forgot about it. I kind of put it away in my mind for a long, long time, and never, because if I didn't hear anybody else talking about it, I wasn't going to be the first to talk about it, because people would just I didn't want to be the brunt of a bunch of jokes, and I think my dad was interested in it, especially after he read the True Magazine article. But I thought for sure that when those two slabs of pork were taken off the back rafters of our house, I thought for sure my dad would probably, put two and two together, but it didn't seem like he did. He just kind of dismissed it. It was just a mystery that he couldn't solve. And in the back there where they hung the meat, it was concrete. And then my mom's clothesline was back there, and that was all gravel. So there were no footprints that we could see. So, we just kind of struck out that way.
Was that time that you saw the Bigfoot in Lake County, was that the weirdest thing that you've seen in your life then, I would imagine?
Oh yeah.
No doubt.
That's number one. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, I live in Tennessee, Middle Tennessee now. We've lived here back in Tennessee here for about 16 years. And I wanted to buy a pickup, and I found one in West Virginia. And so when I drove up to West Virginia with my wife to pick up my truck, I saw as I was driving through West Virginia, I was all these stories that I'd heard on these podcasts about all the Bigfoot sightings that they see in West Virginia. I was looking down in every holler. I was looking all over. I was just looking all over the countryside. I was sure that I was going to see a Bigfoot up there, but no, I didn't see any Bigfoot up there either. But I guess that's Bigfoot country up there, that in Ohio and Washington and Oregon.
Well, that, and I mean, some of the craziest reports I've ever taken have been from Middle Tennessee. It's pretty wild. I mean, I would keep my eyes out where you are. You'll probably hear some crazy stuff someday if you listen to people talking in the right areas, for sure. But
there's a guy that lives in Nashville. His name is Dave Eller, and he's a Bigfoot investigator, and he draws a 100-mile circle around Nashville, and he talks about all the craziness that he sees out in these woods. I live in Putnam County, and I've looked at the BFRO website and other websites to see if there's any Bigfoot sightings in Putnam County. It's a pretty large county here in Middle Tennessee, and we're surrounded by hundreds of thousands of acres of just undeveloped forest land. And there are no sightings in Putnam County, but if you go south of Putnam County into White County and Warren County, then you start seeing on these Bigfoot maps where people have seen and spotted these creatures out there. Hopefully this will connect.
Sorry about that. We had some weird tech issues come out of nowhere, but yeah, we're back. Sorry about that, sir.
Yeah, Tennessee's got its fair share over in the Smoky Mountains. You know, there's, Dave Paulides, he's written over there in his 411 books about, little children, out in the field playing under the supervision of their parents. They look away for a second or two, and next thing you know, their kids are gone and there's not a trace. They mount a big manhunt and nobody can find them.
Yeah, the whole Dennis Martin case is wild. I believe it's probably what you're referring to.
So it leads me to believe that these creatures can camouflage and hide in plain sight. People think they may be looking at a tree or a stump or a rock or a bush, and they just don't know what they're looking at, and they can't. Some strange stuff is. There's a lot of things about this earth that we can't explain.
Oh, I agree. Along the rest of your life, did you ever get to a point where you're like, you know what, I'm actually going to go out and look for Bigfoot myself, or was there no desire ever to do that?
No, I was gonna try to track down Dave Eller down here in Nashville to see if I could go out with him wherever he goes and see if we can come up with some encounters. And because I don't know if the Sasquatch critters that they're seeing in this neck of the woods look anything like what I saw out in California. I know the stuff they see down in the big thicket parts of Texas, they look more like apes.
Mm-hmm.
They got the face of an ape, I guess.
Absolutely.
And so they're and they're reporting that some of these creatures have 3 toes, 4 toes, 5 toes. I don't know if that's interbreeding problems. I don't know what causes that, and I was gonna say to you that there's a there's a mountain resort in eastern Tennessee called McLeod Mountain Lodge. And for a few years back, I took my wife to that lodge. It sits up on top of this mountain, and you can look out over Norris Lake and it's pretty close to the Kentucky border. And so we spent the night up there. It's really a beautiful, beautiful place, and beautiful rooms, great food. So the next day when we left, I noticed that I didn't really pay any attention when we pulled into the compound where this lodge is, but it's got about a 14-foot wall all around the lodge. And I thought, that is kind of, why would they have like a 12 or 14-foot high wall around this place? That just, and on the face of the lodge, on the part of all the buildings where all the windows are, it's just a sheer drop off of just hundreds and hundreds of feet, so it sits right on the edge of this cliff. So anyway, we're leaving the lodge. I notice the walls, makes me wonder, and as I go through the exit, I see this little sign. And by the way, there's no on the road that goes from this little town of Lafayette or something like that all the way to the top of the mountain. Nobody lives up there. You got to go clear the top of the mountain before you see 2 or 3 cabins plus this lodge. And that's it. There's nothing up there hardly, just a few little cabins. So anyway, we go out the gate on our way home. I see this sign. It says something like overlook or something like that. And it's got an arrow pointing to the right. So I thought, okay, well, let's go drive over and see what this overlook looks like. So we drive out there about a half a mile, and the paved road starts to get pretty iffy, and then it goes to dirt, and then it got to the point where it was actually a 4-wheel drive road. So I keep going, and I finally find this place called the Overlook. And it's a part of the top of this mountain that is solid granite. And I'm not sure who did it, but they built all these wooden walkways with handrails all over the top of this granite kind of part of the top of this mountain. And it was about, I would say that the area that this walkway covered was maybe 3 or 4 acres, pretty good size. So anyway, we take some pictures and we get back in the truck, and we're headed back out to the road that goes down that mountain. And my wife is looking at her Facebook page and sending pictures to all her friends. And so I'm driving out here, and I was going really slow because I had to be in 4-wheel drive to get out of this thing, big deep ruts and all this stuff. And I looked off to my left, and I see a tree formation that just looks odd. So I stop and back up, and I look at it, and I thought, this looks like a Sasquatch trail marker that I've read about. So I got out, and I walked over to it, and there was a footpath, pretty well worn footpath, that went from the area next to the road, this dirt road, 4-wheel drive road, and it kind of went up the side of this really steep part of the hill. I don't think I could have walked up it. It was that steep, but it was well worn. It had a lot of foot traffic on it, and so right next to this path, there was a sapling, a pine sapling about 3 inches in diameter, and about from where the tree came out of the ground up to where it had been twisted and then snapped. And I looked at that and I thought, that doesn't happen in nature. And I looked around at other trees, and there are no other damaged trees next to it at all. And then down below it, about 5 or 6 feet, there was another sapling that was about, I want to say the tree was about 25, maybe 30 feet long, and it had been bent into an arc. And then the top of the tree was jammed down into the ground. And then there was nothing else holding the tree. It was just the top of the tree jammed into the dirt, and it held that tree in a perfect arc. That doesn't happen in nature either.
That is some wild stuff. Wow.
Yep. So I got home. Later that, it's about a 2.5 hour drive over there from where we live.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
And it's all just really little bitty farms here and there, really, really old farm buildings. Some of them built on rock foundations. Have you ever seen that, where they build the old houses way back in the 1800s? The foundation is they put the wooden structure on top of rocks. They use that for a foundation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen that out
yeah,
east.
You see, okay, yeah, we've all seen that stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of what's back there.
Wow.
And these little towns are kind of small, and so it's just kind of remote up there on top of McLeod Mountain. So anyway, I drive home, and the next day I get on the computer and I track down this guy, Bob Strain, and I come up with his wife, Kathy Strain, and it tells all about her, that she's an anthropologist. She works for the U.S. Department of Forestry. And when they are in the national forest and they come upon Indian remains, then that's her bailiwick. She works with the Indian tribes to do whatever the Indian tribe wants to do with those bones. Take them someplace, bury them someplace, rebury them. I don't know, whatever they do. But because of her job, and because she's out in the forest all the time, in pretty remote parts of the California forest, she's come into contact with these things. And I sent her a messenger. I didn't know what her phone number was. I didn't know what her email address was, but I found her on Facebook and Messenger. So I sent her a picture of this thing, and I said, "What is this?" And she wrote right back within maybe half an hour or so and said, "Oh, that's a Sasquatch trail marker. Where is that?" And I said, "McLeod Mountain in East Tennessee." And she said, "Yep, they're just marking the trail." And so that's kind of what. So as I drive around Tennessee, and I'm a motorcyclist, I'm 79 and I'm still riding motorcycles, But I rode them all my life on the highway patrol. Had them as I was a kid. Can't get motorcycles out of my blood. So we got beautiful backcountry roads here. The roads are well paved. They go out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm always looking for any kind of tree structure that just looks odd. The road that I live on has about 12 houses on it, and it's about not quite a mile long, and it dead ends. It dead ends up the hill from me, and from that point on, it's about 15,000 acres of nothing but undeveloped woods. The only thing that goes through that 15,000 acres is an underground high-pressure propane line that goes from Nashville to Knoxville. And it's buried underground, but there's a big clearing on, so they can have access to go in there and work on that line if they have to. And I take my four-wheeler and I go back in there, and I have looked all over place back there looking for any kind of weird signs of anything, and I have yet to find it. But I'm going to dig up Dave Eller's. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to get a hold of him. I know that they just had a Bigfoot conference down in McMinnville, which is about an hour and 20 minutes from my house. And I didn't know it, or I would have been there, because Eller was there. Who's the guy with the Sierra Sounds?
Ron Moorhead. Yep. Ron
Moorhead. He was there, and a bunch of other people were there.
Oh, you're talking about the Tennessee Wildman Conference.
Yeah, it just happened just a few days ago.
Supposedly
it was over
phenomenal.
The weekend.
Yeah, there are a lot of really. You need to go next year if you can make it, because the people there are all fantastic people. I've met a lot of them, and they are just great individuals.
These aren't people that are delusional.
No.
These aren't people making up stories. Ron Moorhead tells some pretty spooky stories about where he was up there with those people, and they went inside this tree or something, and it wasn't them that made it, but it was already there, and they went up, and it was kind of like this camping spot up in the Sierra Mountains, and they were back miles and miles back in there. And almost immediately when they got back there, they heard tree knocks and whooping and hollering and carrying on all night until it got down right in their campsite. And they took refuge in this hollowed out tree, and somebody had created this out of logs or something that were chained together. They could make this little fortress in this hollowed out tree, and they all got in there to protect themselves, because I guess there was some pretty aggressive stuff going on out in their campsite, and that's some pretty spooky stuff. But do you believe that our government knows all about these creatures?
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
They know more about these. They know more about these things than anybody on the planet, probably. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually got one in captivity.
Dude, I've heard some wild stuff, and it's like, if there's all the UFO stuff and that's coming out, that, I mean, you hear all these stories about stuff around bases or sightings on bases in certain areas. That there's got to be some Bigfoot that are, and some people even think that the Bigfoot stuff is related to the UFO stuff coming out. And I mean, that's an interesting viewpoint.
You see all these orbs, these light orbs in the forest, and they see all this kind of stuff, and you wonder what the heck is that stuff,
It's very very interesting, because there's no right or wrong answers, and it's like every answer you find leads to 10 different questions, and it's crazy stuff.
The Indians, they've had relationships with the Kathy Strain's got this book, and I'm got a couple of books. I'm gonna go on Amazon and see if I can find them. And because all those encounters that she writes about are just the stories told to her by the Indian tribes, the Lakota and the Navajo and the Apache and all those folks. And I think it was either the Navajo or the Apache drove them out of Arizona and drove them back up in the northern Utah and up in there. But I've listened to so many credible podcasts where these helicopter pilots and their observers are out flying these big power lines just to make sure that tree limbs or branches or debris aren't interfering with the transmission lines. And they're out in the middle of nowhere, out in places that would take you a day or two to hike into. And here's a male Sasquatch, mama Sasquatch, and baby Sasquatch, just out there in the middle of nowhere. And in some cases, these things will stand their ground. Other times they just run away.
It's wild stuff.
It's mysterious. It's mysterious. And this guy, the Dave Eller down here in Nashville, I've listened to him on YouTube when he seems to be pretty fearless. And he was talking about on a podcast I listened to recently. He was talking about someplace west of Nashville, out in the woods north of Interstate 40, and he came to this place. He called it a glade, and it's just a place in the forest where the flora of the forest is just solid stone. It's just out in the middle of the forest. Nothing grows there. And he's had a lot of encounters in those areas. And so I tried to look up to see if there was any map on the internet that showed where some of these glades might exist, but I couldn't find anything. But he's had some pretty, and there's another place where a lot of Bigfoot sightings, land between the lakes.
Yes, in Kentucky.
Which is over.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of it's in Tennessee, part of it's in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the lakes were formed back in the 1800s when they had this big earthquake and the Mississippi River reversed course and created these lakes. And I even read that it said that the earthquake was so severe that it rang the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. Now I don't know about that.
Well, that's a wild one. But that same area
is a wild one.
It's pretty heavy with dogman sightings as well. The whole land between the lakes area.
Yeah, Judy and I went in there. We were on our way back from some camping trip out maybe in South Dakota somewhere, and we came through there, and we spent the night there in this campground in the land between the lakes. It is an unusual place, and but I wasn't into Bigfoot. I wasn't looking for anything at that time, and wasn't thinking about that. But later on, when I started listening to this Dave Eller guy, then I thought, wow, they got a lot of sightings over there. And but you got to go out and you got to get away from people and where people normally go, and then I guess you'll run into these things. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you got to get back out into nature, and who knows what you'll find. So be prepared. But Mr. Black, this has been a awesome chat. It's gone places that I wasn't expecting it to go, and I'm glad it went to all the places it did. But thank you so much for contacting me, and I hope that you stay in touch and with any other interesting things that happen in the next coming years.
I've got some friends that are retired from the patrol in California, and they live down here in Warren County, and they live out in the middle of nothing. And I haven't seen these guys for a couple of months, and I'm gonna see if those guys have seen anything that they're just keeping to themselves, There
you go.
And because they decided that they were going to be, they're going to raise some chickens, and they're going to have a goat or two, and that kind of thing. And I can't think of anything that might make a good meal than a chicken or a goat,
Mm-hmm.
for some of these, And and a lot of my friends here hunt, and I think a lot of the people that see these Bigfoot are hunters. And the most fascinating stories to me are told by hunters who really, really tell some kind of bone-chilling stories about these critters, and how some of those guys have shot those things and they just run off. They don't die. They're shooting them with 7mm mags. They're shooting them with all kinds of 30-06s, and they can see the round go through this thing. They can see tree bark or something fly as a bullet goes through them, and these things scream and yell and carry on and just run off, and never to be found again. It's just I don't know if you can kill these things or not.
It's wild. Who knows? Maybe someday someone will see. But if you ever run into anyone you're talking to that has any other interesting things to report as well, you can always feel free to pass on my information. I'd love to talk to them as well. But
I'll do that. I know that the other night I was listening to this podcast, and these two truck drivers, husband and wife, are going up they were in Minnesota, and they were traveling along this road up that kind of paralleled the Mississippi River, and they see this Black Hawk helicopter hovering just above the tree line. And as they continue to drive along in their truck, wherever they were going to deliver freight, why this Black Hawk kind of increases its elevation, and there's a big cable hanging below the helicopter, and below that is a huge white bag that's attached to the cable, attached to the bottom of the helicopter. And within just a few minutes of them seeing that, both their cell phones rang, and there was a message that said, "We want to talk to you." And they said they just deleted the message from their voice message, and they just kept on driving. Now that's creepy.
That's some wild stuff. You never know what's going to happen, for sure. It's crazy. You got to keep your eyes open.
It's good talking to you, and thanks for taking the time to listen to my crazy story.
You got it, Mr. Black. Keep in touch, sir. Thank you for chatting tonight.
Hey, good night and have a good one.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.